When somebody plays the London system, they don't expect to be crushed in like 15 moves. So this is exactly what we're going to do. Hi, I'm Dr. Siddharth Yadav, and in this episode of Chess for Pandas, we will continue our discussion of the main line of this amazing gambit where we first sacrifice a pawn, then we sacrifice a piece, and then we should probably be winning. So without further ado, let's get into it. So after d4, g5, bishop f4, we are into the London system. And here in the previous episodes, we have recommended that we go c5, e3, knight c6, c3, and queen b6, putting pressure on the b2 pawn. Now we have covered a lot of different lines, but queen b3 being the main one, where c4 and queen c2, e5 is the amazing pawn sacrifice. Now in the previous video, which is the second video in the series, we have covered what happens after bishop takes e5. But the main move which is played by far the most often is d takes e5. So now we're going to have a look at this particular position. So we've sacked a pawn and now we sack the piece with bishop f5. Two main moves here. Either you take the bishop or you retreat with the queen while keeping protection of b2. Let's have a look at the queen takes f5 line. So they capture a bishop. Obviously we capture the pawn on b2. Now we are threatening the rook here. That was the whole point of the bishop sacrifice. Excuse me. So now they have two main moves here. e6 is a really tricky one. Obviously you can't take the rook because you get checkmated. So that's not possible. So what do you do? In e6, I recommend that you just immediately take the pawn. And now after queen takes e6, we have bishop e7. I like this move bishop e7 more than knight to g7 because I would like to place the knight on f6. So after bishop e7, queen takes d5 is also very commonly played because, well, you can take it. But that's actually a blunder because after rook d8, queen c4, what else? There's actually just a checkmate in two moves, queen c1 and queen d1. So taking the d7, d5 pawn is not really recommended. So what a lot of players do is they play knight f3. Over here, we can safely capture the rook, and now we are threatening to capture the knight. So knight f to d2 is a good defensive try. Now, obviously, the queen can wriggle out now through b2, but let's just continue developing because there's no immediate threat to capture the queen. So knight f6, we are developing and protecting the d5 pawn, bishop e2, and now knight d8. We basically want to threaten the queen and we want the queen to leave this particular place so that after it leaves, then we can simply castle. But white can try to make our life slightly more difficult. Queen to e5, continuing to maintain the pin on the bishop, so we can't really castle right now. And also now threatening to push the move e4 to blast open the position because the king is stuck in the center. But no worries, we can keep harassing the queen with knight to f7. After knight f7, the queen is attacked again. So now queen e6 seems like a logical way to keep on the e-file and asking us slightly more questions. Here I believe that we can simply take the a2 pawn. And now the point of this move is to basically allow the queen to come to the defense of the king. Now the queen has several ways it can do that. It can either come directly to a6 and threaten a queen trade, or it can come to a4 and then to c6 to do the same. Also, it prevents the sting and takes out the sting from the e4 move. Let's have a look at a couple of continuations. Let's have a look at e4 directly, which is the most direct approach to open up the position. Here we play queen to a5, another option that the queen can take. It can now come here to directly defend the pawn. And now let's say if they keep pushing, taking really doesn't do anything because it allows us to liquidate and exchange material. So let's say e5, knight d7, castle, and now knight f8. You can see that the knights are doing a good job of vacating the queen. Queen f5, and now because of the knight we can't really castle. So knight g6. And now we are finally threatening to castle. And don't think that they can go queen e6 because the bishop is lost now. So now we'll finally be able to castle. e6 is the move that actually puts a spanner in the works, but it's not to be afraid of. We can simply castle, and the point is that after e takes f7, rook takes f7, the bishop behind the queen is actually going to be lost. The best way white can give up this bishop is this strange computer line, which I haven't seen being tried anywhere, is bishop c7. We take the bishop, they take the pawn, we go knight f4, queen takes c4, knight e2, queen takes e2, and a5. I like this position for black because we have a clear passed pawn. They also do have a passed pawn here, but knights are actually really bad at handling passed pawns on the side of the board. So the knights are really bad with h and a pawns, and we have exactly that. While the bishop also conveniently controls the promotion square. So in several cases, it will be able to put pressure on the c3 pawn and also control the promotion square. And we do have two rooks. So there is plenty of firepower, and we are also just an exchange up. So that's something to also keep in mind. So after this particular variation, we have to look at something else after queen takes a2, and that is the move directly castles. So they can castle directly instead of going e4. Here I recommend that we come to a4 and we go for this natural queen c6 move. e4, I don't really see a lot of other active ideas. e4 also opens up the position and also tries to soften the c4 pawn so that the knight or the bishop can actually take the pawn after we capture. But we don't want to capture, we want to go queen c6. And over here, e takes d5, knight takes d5 is a good move. Now we're threatening both the queen and the bishop. Logical way to deal with this would be queen takes e6 check, b takes e6, and now just dropping the bishop back. Here the pawn on c4 is doomed, so I don't really think we should spend any time trying to protect it. So we can simply castle, knight takes, and a5. And we have a similar situation to the other one. We are a rook up. The difference being that there is more material on the board. So white does have the advantage of the bishop pair, but I don't think it should suffice in the long run because we will be able to exchange one of those bishops, and the pass pawn will always be a menace. And it could very well be the case that white is just tied to the defense for the whole game. So that's what can happen with queen takes a2 and direct castle. But here I want to discuss something else also. Let's say they don't go to this variation of e6 after we capture the pawn, right? After we capture the b2 pawn. Let's say they don't go e6. There is another variation, which is knight f3. And this is something that trips people a lot. I have already talked about it in the previous video, but here directly taking the pawn is actually a mistake because we can actually, white can actually go back. Or I believe there might be a move where first you go knight g5 and then you can actually, because you're threatening mate here, and then you can actually go back. But in either case, this is not a good position for black. The reason being, let's say we bring the bishop out with bishop a3, trying to get our queen out or jailbreak our queen through b2. Bishop e3, bishop e2. White is basically trying to castle and then capture the bishop so that the queen will be trapped. Queen b2, and after queen takes b2, and king d2, you actually see that the bishop is trapped. I mean, the bishop can go here, but that's not any square for the bishop to go. It's doing nothing there. The bishop can't come to a3 because of the knight, and the bishop is actually trapped, and white simply is going to win that bishop with king to c2. So in such situations, whenever you see that you can capture the rook, but the queen can actually, whenever you see that you can actually capture the rook, but the white queen can actually come back to c3, that's already a sign that something is fishy. So in such situations, I recommend that you simply move the knight and try to dislodge the queen from this particular diagonal. And knight g7 does exactly that. Now it doesn't matter, you can also go to queen h5, but queen h3 is all the same. Now another finesse that I mentioned in the previous one is that yes, you can take the rook, but you take it in a slightly different manner. First you give this check, which forces the king to come up, and now the bishop's diagonal is blocked, right? Now you give a check again, and probably they're going to bring the knight here. I mean, moving back with the king would make no sense, because after you, let's say, capture, the knight is still hanging here, and now since the king has moved, it will no longer be able to castle, right? So let's say they bring their knight here to defend this other one, and now you simply capture the rook. And I think this is a much better way of capturing the rook in the corner. The bishop is now blocked, the king can no longer castle, and I really like this position for black. So this is the simple thing that you can do after they decide to take queen takes f5. Now let's have a look at the other move, which is queen to c1. So guys, what is the point of this move, queen to c1? Now queen to c1 simply wants to protect the b2 pawn, and it's not going to d2, so that the knight can actually safely come to d2. And we don't want to capture the bishop, because obviously we saw the whole line with queen takes b2 is actually very strong. So what do you do now? You have sacked the pawn, white has taken the pawn, you have sacked the bishop, but white has declined the bishop for obvious reasons. What do you do now? Well, here I recommend that we play g5, which is the most direct way to blow open the position. Now here there are two moves. The bishop takes g5, and you can decline the second pawn and say, you know what, I'm basically going back. I'm not really comfortable entering your home preparation. Now the best move according to the engines actually bishop takes g5, something that we'll cover in this video extensively. The other move, which is not the best according to the engines, but something that has been played the most often, is bishop g3, and we will discuss about this move in the final episode of this particular series. That will be the next video. So let's discuss about the best move, bishop takes g5. Here, since bishop has left guard of the pawn, we simply capture the pawn over here. And now we have several ideas with the centralized knight. We can go check, we can exert more pressure with the bishop, we can come bishop d3, and we'll see a lot of these ideas. Now here is knight d2, which is the most common move here. And what does knight d2 do? Well, basically he wants to bring the other knight here, but when we capture back, let's say, he doesn't want to double his pawn structures, and he wants to keep this particular thing intact. That's what they want to do. Now here is something interesting. Before going in depth into knight d2, which is the main move here, and also the most common move, one of the most common moves, let's have a quick look at knight to f3. Now on knight to f3, there are two moves that black can play. They can first give this check on d3, and the second thing is they can take. Now in 90% of these positions, whenever this particular knight is challenged, it's always a good idea to give a check, so that after knight takes d3, bishop takes d3, bishop takes d3, now this particular bishop is controlling a fantastic place and square here, and now it will be really easy for black to develop the game around this particular bishop, because it will make white's task of castling really difficult. The only problem in this particular concrete variation is that white has this move knight to e5, which immediately threatens the bishop, and the bishop will have to move again. Now, before going too much into detail, let me just tell you that this is something that does not occur very often. White often doesn't know about this move knight e5, and that's why they don't generally play it, but I'm here to prepare you for all of these responses, right? So knight e5 is the one. Bishop f5, we want to control we don't want to give up the bishop right now, and now we're threatening f5. Now here is a fantastic move that white has in this position. Okay, I mean, castle is not possible because you're losing a piece. You have to do something concrete. e4 is possible, or moving the bishop back is possible. But the best move is queen to d1. And queen to d1 is really amazing. It's threatening the pawn on d5, is pressurizing that pawn, is threatening to come to e5, h5 with check, is threatening to come to a5 with check, a4 with check. So there are lots of threats here. The obvious move to trap or force the pieces actually loses directly to queen h5 check, so that we can't do. Another attempt would be bishop g7, directly attacking that particular knight. But here we have this particular check, queen a4, king f8, queen a3 check again, which not only gives check to the king but also protects the b2 pawn. So there is no queen takes b2. The king comes back, and now simply knight f3. And you see the king has actually been dislodged here in this variation, so we will not be able to castle in this variation. We probably can continue this line, but I think this is not a decent version of the position that black wanted to have. Also, instead of knight f3, they can simply also go bishop f4, where after something like f6, knight f3, bishop d3, it seems like finally we have achieved our aim, but we won't be able to castle either side because the king has moved. And I don't really like this position. Even if we continue a little bit, let's say knight b to d2, knight e7, they can simply castle queenside now. The reason being, there are lots of defenders on the queen side, and our lone queen here and the blocked bishop right now will not be able to provide enough threat or firepower to this particular position. And the king, despite being so close to this fantastic bishop on this fantastic diagonal, I don't really think that it would matter much because white is quite safe here. So that is another thing that I don't really want to go into. So that's one of the reasons why directly taking knight takes d3 is not my cup of tea. Well, there is one particular variation that I forgot. Somebody analyzing it with the engine can probably understand that bishop g7 or f6 are not the main moves. The main move is actually bishop to e7. And bishop e7 is actually a good move, but there is a fantastic move also that white has, which is queen f3. Simply ignoring the threat to the bishop because we are threatening our own stuff here. So after something like queen e6, which protects both the vulnerable pieces, they can simply exchange and now go queen f4. Queen f4 is an important idea to find. In this position, if they don't find queen f4, they are worse in all cases, because queen f4 actually provides a square for the knight to go back and also protects the knight. And now the upcoming rook g8 and all will lose their venom because the queen is still close to the king side. Queen f4, if they find it, I think the position should be dynamically balanced. And after something like rook g8, knight a3, queen b6, castle, which is bringing the king to safety and also protecting the b2 pawn. Something like f6, knight f3, rook g4, it seems like the queen is in a very precarious spot, but it can wriggle out just fine. Queen h6, rook takes g2, rook f to d1, bishop to d3, and now here we have queen h5 check. And after something like rook d8, here white doesn't even have to go away with the rook and try to protect it. They can directly go queen h3. And after bishop f1, rook g8, because the rook was attacked, now we go queen takes h7. And this position, this long variation, is kind of dynamically balanced for both the sides, but I still think that white might be the one which is pressuring things here because black still cannot castle. And I know that we have an extra exchange here, but the activity of the white queen combined with the rook being able to come here and the knight might also be able to jump into the action via d4, I think the assessment that this position is dynamically balanced is valid. So that's one of the things that you can get in this particular line. So let's go all the way back. We don't want to go with knight takes d3 in this position whenever we see knight f3. The obvious move here then would be knight takes f3, and I think this is a good move. So after knight takes f3, they capture back, we play f6, f4, knight e7. And I like this position because the f3 pawn actually prevents the bishop from developing. So in several variations, the bishop comes here. Also, the knight often uses the f3 square after going from d2 to f3. So this is a very common move that white has. So f3 is preventing both of that. But it's also enabling the e4 break, and e4 break is now coming, and e4 will not be a sacrifice anymore after knight to d2 and e4, that is. So it does have the merit of, helping central expansion. So let's say a line like after knight d2, knight g6, bishop g3, and now we can continue with both h5 or castle. I like the move castle, and there are several plans that black has. We can use this open file over here with the rook, so rook g8 and pressurizing that particular thing. The bishop obviously controls this diagonal, and I don't see a quick way for white to contest this diagonal with their own bishop, something like bishop e2, bishop d1 and bishop c2, but that will just be too long, and castling either side is really problematic in this position. So this is something that white should avoid, in my opinion, but maybe with precise computer play it's all still playable. So this is a variation that I would like to go into. So if they play knight f3 immediately when there is not the other knight here, and we can capture and double the pawns, I think we should do just that. So now after bishop takes g5, knight takes g5, let's look at the main move, which is knight to d2. So after knight to d2, we play the move f6. We want to dislodge the bishop from this particular diagonal. And now it has two moves. It can go to h4 or f4. f4 is the main move, but let's look at h4 first. So after bishop h4, knight e7 is what we do. Obviously, the bishop cannot take because the queen is here. Just remember that particular point. Then it was not only the knight that was defending the f6 pawn, it's also the queen laterally. So I've seen people actually forget that point and just lose their bishop on the spot. So the main move here is knight g2 f3. And now we see that since the other knight is protecting here, taking the knight would not be really good. So what do? Well, we play knight d3 check. After bishop takes d3 and bishop takes d3, now we see that this diagonal is really a pain point here in this particular variation, because the knight doesn't have the e5 square to evict the bishop immediately. So let's continue. Knight d4 is supposed to be good enough, and after knight g6, bishop g3, h5, it seems to be a very standard position now of this particular variation. So after h4, knight e5, we now are also threatening moves like removing the bishop and then forking the king and the queen. So after knight 2 to f3, bishop d6, queen d2, and castle, queen a6, a3, and rook h2 e8. I like this position for black quite a lot. Both the rooks can actually lift and come to the king side to attack. The bishop probably will not be able to evict it. Something like knight to e1 to evict the bishop, and the bishop can simply drop back. So I don't really think that should be a problem here. And our bishops are looking to sacrifice itself. The other bishop is looking to sacrifice itself also. So all in all, it looks like a very threatening position. With very precise moves, white can hold, but nobody really plays the very precise moves. So that is something that can happen after bishop to h4. But now let's look at the main move, which is bishop to f4. So after bishop f4, we basically have two moves here. One is knight e7 and one is knight d3. Knight d3 is something that is very obvious to do, but I don't really recommend it. I'll tell you why. Because white will be able to arrange a castling after some discomfort. So after knight d3, we have to take, and after bishop takes dc, bishop takes d3, we have knight e2. And now the bishop's view is blocked. White can't castle immediately because this knight will be undefended, but that situation won't last long. After knight e7, knight f3, we can castle, they can play queen d2. And now they can actually finally castle. And okay, they might not want to castle into an open g file. So even castling queenside is an option, to be honest, in this position. But in either way, our knight takes d3, knight d3 check has not actually been able to prevent them from castling. So that's why I don't really recommend that we go knight d3 in this position. What do I recommend is we simply continue developing with knight e7. And that seems like the most logical way to do things. Now here, there are two moves which have been tried, which one is bishop takes e5 and the other one is knight g to f3. Well, knight g to f3 is very similar to the other things that we saw in the previous variation of bishop h4, is because since the knight is coming here and we know that the other knight is already protecting it, so we go knight d3 check, bishop d3, something like knight d4 has to be played. The thing is, now if they want to castle, they have to put the knight on e2, and now since they've already brought the knight out to f3 instead of e2, now it will take them 2 more moves to go to e2, either through d4 in e2 or either through g1 in e2. And it is these small details that can actually make the difference between having a successful opening as black or having just a very equal position where white can play almost any move and get away with it. So after bishop takes d3, bishop takes d3, knight d4 seems to be the more active way to go to e2. After knight to g6 and bishop g3, actually we have transferred directly into the bishop h4 line, where after bishop h4 in this position, we play knight e7, knight g2, f3, knight d3 check, bishop takes, knight d4, knight g6, bishop g3. And here, as you know, the main move is h4, h5, trying to cramp, and then there's this entire variation with the castle a3 and rook he8, which we just saw right now. So knight to g2 f3 can actually lead to these positions, but the variation with its own flavor, let's say, is bishop takes e5. So after bishop takes e5, we have f takes e5, knight to f3 is the most common move, and now bishop g7. And I like our pawns in the center, and both the bishops are cutting through the board, so which is also pretty nice to do. So if you have reached this position as black, you should be very happy, because you have forced the London system players into a very passive position, and these are not the positions that they generally get, so they are not really going to be comfortable defending this position. In this exact one, I will look at 4 possible moves here, okay, in this position. These moves will be bishop to e2, there would be e4, there would be knight h4, which just goes bishop hunting, and then there will be b3. Let's look at b3 first. So after b3, we capture c takes b3. They have to capture back, and after we castle, they play bishop e2, and now we simply play rook a to c8, and then we have this additional target to focus on for the rest of the game, which is the weak c3 pawn. And after we are able to crack open the position, we might also be able to get at the rook with the bishop. So b3 shouldn't really trouble us much more. Now let's look at the move knight to h4. Now knight to h4 essentially just goes bishop hunting here, right? So we can go bishop g4. We don't want to give up the bishop. And after h3 and bishop back, the knight is actually quite misplaced here on h4. So let's say they go back with knight to knight f3, and now we can simply castle. And now we see the ideas that the rook is actually threatening a lot of things on f3 and f2, and we have some ideas of probably sacking some point in the future. The queen can also swing all the way to g6, sometimes even h6, to pressurize the king side. So I really like this particular position for black. One thing that they cannot do is e4, and the reason for that is bishop h6, and now we are threatening this particular knight here. Not exactly threatening, but like pinning it. Something like queen c2 will be met by more pressure in the center with rook a to d8. So over here, knight takes e5 is something that's just not possible because of queen takes f2 check, king d1, bishop e3, and now you probably will have to give up the queen after b3, cb3, ab3, and bishop b3. Something like knight b3 and bishop takes e1. So we won't be able to do that. So knight h4 is another variation which should not really suffice. So let's look at the other one, which is, let's look at e4. So after e4, we have d takes e4. In this particular position, after e4, in the previous position, we had bishop h6, which we just saw. Over here, we don't have bishop h6 because obviously our bishop is hanging. So we have to capture the pawn back, and now knight takes c4 is possible. So they've been able to get our pawn. They're attacking the queen, and that's why they can save this particular position. But we can go queen f6, a move that I really like. Now obviously the knight is threatened here, so they have to move the knight. knight f2 d2, and now we can go bishop h3. So you see, it's funny. Previously it was the knight which was already on d2 which was pinned, but now in this variation the knight on f3 which went to e2 d2 is now pinned. So after something like bishop e2, we continue to increase our pressure on that knight with rook, with like castling queenside, and now the rook on d8 is pressuring the knight again. After something like castle, rook h g8, knight e3, which now finally blocks the bishop, knight d5 is really good. And even if white keeps playing the best move, let's just look at a sample line. Knight dc4, knight f4. Here so many pieces are there towards the king side, and I don't really think that we have to take this position very like further. The opening has been a success for black, and now we just have to play good moves, and we have to look out for sacrifices against the enemy king. Let's look at an inferior move, or no, not really inferior, but like one of the best moves. But still, queen c2 is already having a lot of problems, because here knight can actually sacrifice itself on g2, which is a good move. And let's have a look at one of the continuations. So let's say knight takes g2, queen g6, threatening mate, knight c2 e3, bishop takes e3, bishop g4. Now obviously you cannot take with the knight, you can't take with the pawn because of the mate on g2. So hence you have to resort to such moves like bishop g4. And after something like bishop b6, we don't even want to take, because okay, you can take it with check, but we shouldn't really be worried about that, because the knight is still pinned and we are still having a lot. They can never relieve the pin with f3 because the bishop is pinning the pawn. So after something like bishop b6, they can go, well, king h1. And now after queen takes g4, rook g1, queen f3, it's probably already over. A sample line can run something like this, and that should be that. So e4 in this particular position is also possible to deal with. Now let's look at the most commonly played move, which is bishop e2. After bishop e2, the plan should be very simple. We castle, they castle, and we play king h8. And now king h8 is a good move. Okay, I want to mention something here. Why did we not castle queenside in this particular position? Why did we go the kingside castle? Now there are two reasons for this. I don't really think that the white king will really go queenside castle here, because it's way more natural to do this. So it might seem more logical to castle here and then just go with the attack on the g file. However, the problem with this plan, not exactly a problem, let's say, is that it really gives white a free hand to go b3, a4 and open up the queen side. And surely we can also attack down this particular thing, but I've seen in several positions white can just keep their king in the center because they have plenty of pieces protecting their king, and then they can simply try to roll their pawns on the queen side and try to attack us. So that's one of the reasons why this doesn't really work. And the normal plan of just castling and going king h8 is because our own pieces, we have several of our own pieces near the king, so it will be really difficult for them to launch a counterattack on the queen, on our king. So it is safer in that way. And we also have a lot of threats, so let's look at them. The queen can swing on the third rank to f6 or h6 and then pressurize the king side. This knight actually can still go and sack itself on g2, but just take a longer route. And sometimes it can also redirect here to f4 after the e pawn has moved. The rook is obviously very threateningly looking at this particular position. And this bishop, I've seen it take place or take part in the attack after going to h3, but also is just really irritating because they can't really get this b3 a4 break and cannot support it directly with rook b1 because the bishop is still looking at that position. So all in all, it's a good thing. What about our rooks? So the rooks can actually pressurize this particular file, but then in some cases the rook can come to f6 and shift here while the other rook comes to g8. And It's an attacking position with chances for both the sides, I would say, but black's plan is way more straightforward. So that was it for this particular variation. In the next video, we will look at what happens after g5 and then they go bishop to g3, which is not the best move, but it's certainly the most commonly played move. So it should be a wrap the next time we meet, and we'll have a complete repertoire in the fourth and final episode of the series of Beating the London System. So if you got some value from that, consider hitting the subscribe button. It really helps me out, and you also get to be notified about the future uploads that I do. And while you're at it, have a look at these other two videos, which I think you might find really interesting. Until next time,